Hello and welcome to this tutorial video on IMPs. I'm going to cover the automatic allocation strategy for purchasing parts. I'm going to show you how to set it and how it changes how IMPs works. I'll also show you some other connected features that can help you understand the supply and demand of parts on your projects and in your business. The allocation strategy controls how IMPs works out whether you have bought enough of the parts you need, how many you need to buy, whether they are going to be late, on whether the stock you have is free stock you can take for other purposes. Default, the new parts you create will default to this automatic allocation strategy as you make them. So to start, let's have a look at the information page for a part and where this new strategy comes in. So here we've got a fairly simple part. It's part of a few different assemblies that we can do some testing with. And now in the new version of IMPs, we have under in the bottom right corner, the allocation strategy. And we can see here that this one is set to the item merge strategy, which is what has been the only strategy available in the past. But now if we click on this drop-down box, we can see that we also have the automatic strategy and the no allocation strategy. We're not going to cover the no allocation strategy in this video. That'll be for a separate topic. Today, we're just going to look at the automatic strategy. You probably don't need the no allocation strategy very often, so we'll worry about that at a later date. Now, you can change the allocation strategy between item merge and automatic and no allocation as you like, and the system will recalculate as you do. So if you've picked one or you have an existing part that is on the item merge strategy, there's no problem with switching that over to the automatic strategy so that it just does the calculations in a new way. So let's quickly talk about the theory for each strategy, and then I'm going to jump in and show you how it affects certain pages throughout IMPs and how you might react to what you're doing. Let's start with the new strategy that's called automatic allocation. Now this is where you add up how many things you need, subtract how many you have ordered and how many you have in stock. And if you need more than you will have, then IMPs will tell you need to buy more. Now that seems quite simple, right? One of the first points to raise on that is how the counting is done depends on how your company works. If your company manages stock and parts for each individual project, then the counting is done just for the project you have selected. However, if your company manages all projects through a central purchasing and stock system, then the counting is going to be done across all projects. So let's look at how the item merge strategy differed to this. In this strategy, each item we are buying is linked to where it's going to be used. And if there are any items that aren't being bought or aren't known to be in stock or on a PO, then we're going to highlight these items to you and give you an alert saying you need to do something about this. So in the past, you might find that you had a PO raised to deliver some parts and you had a demand on a certain build standard to use those parts. But unless those parts were directly allocated together, so you knew that the items from this PO were going to be used in this assembly, the system would generate alerts to say, oh, you need to buy more items. Oh, you've got these items that you aren't using. Whereas in the new automatic allocation strategy, it's just going to add those two numbers together. And as long as you've ordered more than you need, it's going to think everything's okay. Again, we'll come back and talk a little bit more about those differences as we go through the system. Now, one of the new features added to IMPs is the production information dialog box. This is a dialog box that is accessed through many pages in IMPs and is accessed on the part page using this cubes icon on the command bar. And you will see this cubes icon on other pages as well. And when you click on it, it will open the production information dialog window. Now, the main part of this window is a list of items, and these items are either items that are a demand, so they're going to be consumed somewhere, or they're a supply, so they're being produced by a purchase order or a work order, or they're in stock. And so we'll just go through this table and look at the columns. Firstly, on the left, we've got a left arrow or a right arrow. A right arrow is telling us that this is a supply of a part, so it's something that's either in stock or is being produced or bought. A left arrow, in contrast, is a consumption of a part, a demand for a part, so it's going to be used to fulfill a work order or a sales order or similar. Next column just gives us more information about if this part is a demand, where it's being demanded, or where it's being consumed. So here we can see it's being consumed on activity BD001. And if we mouse over, we can just get a little bit more information about that and see that it's on project BE001 as well. The produced by column is similar, but it's for parts that are being supplied. So it tells us information about how they're being supplied. They're either being supplied through a purchase order, as we can see here with purchase order 2, or it may be that they're being supplied by a work order, so they're being assembled internally, and they'll be the output from a work order. Or it could be that they are already in stock. And if they're in stock at this point, we will list the name of the stores that they're in. So here, these 2 items are located in the test center stores. Next, we have the item name, and that might just contain some useful information such as a serial number or specific information about that part because it's customized in some way. The quantity tells us how many items are in that group. So here we know that there are 2 items in stock at the test center, and there are 2 items to be delivered from purchase order 2. The date column tells us the date that part will be open or available, or the date that part will be required if it's a demand. So here we can see that for items in stock, this is the date they arrived in stock, so this is in the past, and so they appear at the top of the list. For items that are on purchase order, this is the date that they are due to be delivered on the purchase order, and this can also potentially be in the past if the item is late. It's worthwhile noting just here that we'll always show items that are in stock first, because those are items that we know you can use now because we have them. Items on the purchase order will appear below that because they, even though the date might be in the past, if they're still outstanding, we don't have them yet. We expect them to arrive soon. And then we'll continue in sequential order. And so items that are acquired on a work order will show the date that work order is due to start. The final column is the quantity available, and that is a running total of how many we have available after this line has completed. So we can see for the first line, we have 2 in stock, so the quantity available is 2. When purchase order 2 is delivered, we'll have another 2, so the quantity available at that point will be 4. And when we come to build activity 1, we will need 5 of these, at which point we're going to have a shortage. We're going to be 1 short of what we require, and that's why we have a -1 here, and that's also why this row is highlighted in red. If at any point we have a shortage with a negative available quantity, we will highlight that row in red. If there was a minimum stock level, that would also be shown here. It would always be the last thing on the list because it's how many we want to have after we've completed all of the actual demands. And so if you had a minimum stock level of 10, there would be another line. There's a demand of 10 on the end, and our quantity available will go down to -11. So a negative number within the list. So you might find that if it's a longer list, you might find you temporarily have a shortage, but you're going to have some supply later on. So you'll have a red line like halfway down the list, and that's okay. But if the last line is showing us a shortage, that means that we know that overall we don't have enough of this part. That's what's going to trigger this part turning up on the item search page. If we think the information is out of date, we can click on this icon in the bottom left, which will just go and refresh the data. So if we've been making changes that would affect this dialog box in a different tab or window, we can just click that button to make sure we're looking at the latest information. As I mentioned earlier, some people have projects that are managed separately, and so the stock for each project is counted separately, and some companies work where the stock is managed across the company. In this example, we are only looking at the information for a specific project, which is project 1, and we can see that in the project selection at the top. We can change this to look at another project that we have, and here we will see different supply and different demand. So here we've got a different demand on a build demand 7, supplying 5 items, and a different purchase order 3 is supplying 10 items. If we select any project, we get a combined list of all the projects that we have. So now we can see that we have both of those POs are shown and both of those demands. And that's actually changed our overall calculation. If your company tracks stock by project, this is going to default to the project you have selected. And if your company tracks stock across the whole company, this is always going to default to the any project, even if you have a specific project that you're working on. We'll always be looking at the list across the whole company. Another thing that it's important to note is that it doesn't matter which allocation strategy we have, we can still merge items in the way that we used to previously. So I can still look at this demand on project 7, and if I click into this, I can look at the details. And if I find my CO2 scrubber, I can go into details for this, and I can do find item from PO stock. And I can see here that I've got 3 available on this purchase order. Again, I'm working in a company that tracks stock across separate projects, so I'm only seeing stock that is coming into my project, so on purchase orders that are assigned to the same project as this item. But I can click on the tick box, and that's going to merge the item together. So now I'm going to know that these 5 items are definitely coming from purchase order 3. And if I then go back to the part page and open this up again, we'll switch to project 2. And now we can see on the first line that these items have been combined. So it's both produced by PO3 and consumed on build demand 7. So we can do this no matter which allocation strategy we have, and that won't affect how the numbers are calculated. And just to show, if we change the minimum stock level, or increase that to 10, and go back to the production tab, we'll see that we've added a new line at the bottom showing an extra demand for 10, although there's no specific use for it, and that our net quantity available is going to be 11. So that's the information on the part page and in the production information box. So now we'll move on and look at how that information filters into the other pages in IMS. The primary change you're going to see is on the item search page. So on the item search page, we now have 2 tables. The lower table is the table that has always been there and works in the same way. There's been no changes to this. And these are all the items that are on the old item merge strategy. How this table works is it shows you items that are not merged together. So we can see specific items that have a requirement, and then we'd have to go away and fulfill them. So we can see here that we have an item that requires 3 crew seats and that we have 3 in stock. But because that stock hasn't been allocated to the crew seat, then it still appears on this list. The upper table is for items that are on the new automatic allocation strategy system. And these parts don't split out into individual items. We just give you totals for all the uses and all the demands of that part across the project or across your company. So for the CO2 scrubber, we can see that we have a quantity of 11. And if we go back to the production information dialog, we have a cubes icon on the left, so we can click that. We can confirm that, again, for project 1, which is the project we're working on, 11 is the net quantity that we are short once we take into account the minimum stock level. Otherwise, this table looks similar to the original table. We've got the part name, we've got a code, and we've got the date required. We've got the supplier. So if we have a default supplier, we will see them here. So we know where we'd order them from. And again, the filtering we have at the top applies to both tables at the same time. So if I change project, for example, then both tables will update. And I can also select any project to look at all items that are required across all projects. Let's go back to project 1 for now. And I will also just highlight at this point the exclude minimum stock filter here. And this will ignore minimum stock requirements when it's working out what parts we have shortages for. So if I tick this box, we can see that the quantity we require for the scrubber goes from 11 to 1 because we're not counting that minimum stock requirement. And so there's only one more actually required on my project. So this is useful if you just want to know what is actually needed for your project or what you are actually short of, disregarding how many you'd like to have in stock for the long term. Another addition to both tables on this page is the purchasing history dialog box. This is shown by the $sign on the right-hand side. And if we look at this page, it's a simple table which is just listing the previous times we have bought this item on their POs. And so we can look up who we've bought it from in the past and how much we paid to give us some information about who we want to buy from this time round. So we can see here that we've bought it from 2 different suppliers, and it looks like DIY Habitation are cheaper, but it may be CO2 Direct have a lower lead time. So this is a simple historical list just to help you make purchasing decisions. The other difference on this table is the stock detail. And this is 3 numbers that, again, are just there to give you a helpful guide to the urgency of what you're buying or how you might wish to go about purchasing this line. And it's composed of 3 numbers. The first is the quantity you have available in stock right now. The second is the quantity you have on order. And the final number is the quantity you require. So if you take the third number and subtract the first 2, you end up with the shortage and the quantity you need. So you can see here that there's a total demand for 15, but we've got the supply of 4, so we've got a shortage of 11. So to keep things simple, I'm just going to go to this part and remove the minimum stock level, just so that the calculations shown are a bit easier to follow. And we'll see that if I refresh this page, we now have a different net shortage of just 1. The project filter will always filter the parts shown to only include parts that are on the project you've selected. If your company only calculates stock on a per project basis, then the numbers calculated will only be for that project. And if you select a different project, you will see a different number calculation. So here we can see that the CO2 scrubbers have a net requirement on the project 1, but although they're used on project 2, there is no net requirement for them, so they aren't displayed. And we'll just confirm that by going back to the project 1, looking at the production info, and we can see that there is a net requirement of 1 for the first project, and there is an excess supply of 5 on the second project, which is why we don't need to purchase any more. If our company stock across all projects, then this list will still be filtered by parts that are only used on the project we have selected, but the calculations will still be done across all projects. So in a company that operated that way, we would not see the CO2 scrubber shown because overall we would have a positive number available at the end, similar to how we can see it if we select any project in the production info dialog box. We can also select any project in this filter, and again, it will do the calculation across all projects. So the CO2 scrubber hasn't been displayed because we know that if we look at the combined numbers across all our projects, we have enough to meet all our demands. So to show how the allocation strategy affects the calculations on this page, and hopefully how it makes things a bit simpler, we can look at this example of the crew seat. We have a requirement for 3, and we have 3 of them in stock. So ideally, we'd think that actually there's no net demand there. And in the old system, what we would do is we would tick the box and we would click allocate from stock. And that would merge those items together, make that direct allocation, and that would remove that demand from this list. If we go to this part and change the allocation strategy from item merge to automatic, we can then return to this page, we recalculate the demands, we can see that that has now been removed because the system now recognizes that we have 3 in stock, we have a demand for 3, so there's no net shortage, and so there's no reason to present that to the user at this point. We can see that if we go back to the crew seat page, click on the production info dialog, we can see that project 1, there are 3 in stock, demand for 3, the net quantity available is 0, so there's no shortage and no reason to display it to the user on the item search page. So now I'm going to change a few more parts over to the new automatic allocation strategy, and then we'll look into how that affects a few more parts of the system. So here I've now moved the orbital capsule, the heat shield, the vacuum thruster, and the docking ring across to the automatic allocation strategy, and they've moved up into the new table at the top. So if I now want to, for example, order the heat shield from a supplier, I can tick the box next to the part I want, hit add to purchase order, I can choose my supplier. I've now created this PO with that part added, and it's automatically pulled in the right quantity. And if I close this, I've now created this PO with that part added, and it's automatically pulled in the right quantity. And if I close this, I can go to this item on this PO, and we can see that it's not been directly allocated to anything. So we know we're buying it, but it's not linked directly into where it's being used, which is the case when you use the item merge strategy from that page. So if we return to the item search page, we notice that this has now been removed from the list because there is no net shortage because we've ordered what we need. If we take the case of the vacuum thruster, we can add that to a purchase order. And again, we'll just create a quick purchase order. But what we'll do is we'll reduce the quantity to 2. So we're not buying all that we need. And now if we go back to the item search page, we'll see that the vacuum thruster is still listed, but now the quantity required is 2. And on the detail, we can see that's because we've got a requirement for 4, but we have 2 outstanding on a PO and none currently in stock. This information is also reflected on the project purchasing page. So if I load the project purchasing page for this project, we get the same information but presented in this hierarchical view. So we can see that the crew seat is fully accounted for because we've got 3 in stock. The heat shield is fully accounted for because we've got 1 on PO. The vacuum thruster, we have 2 on PO, but we need 4, so we still have a shortage of 2. And again, for the docking ring, we haven't ordered any yet, so we've got a shortage of 1. For the CO2 scrubber, there are 2 in stock, 2 on PO, but we need a total of 5, so we've still got a shortage of 1. One thing to note, these shortages only take into account the project requirement. If there is a minimum stock level, that will not be included on this page. So on the item search page, when we're looking at a broader view, we'll also take into account minimum stock levels. But when we're just looking at a specific thing we are building, then the shortages are only calculated for that assembly. And again, from this page, if we wanted to order those final 2 vacuum thrusters, I can click on the tick box, click add to purchase order. I can then increase the quantity on that PO. And now that's updated. We see that it's on project 5 and we're now getting the full quantity of 4. If I return to the item search page, we can also see that for items that are an assembly, we can either tick the box and create a purchase order, or we can use the create work order button to create an internal work order that is fulfilled by production staff. Now, if we switch to the stock level page, we can look at some changes to how we manage and process stock. The first thing to note is if you work for a company where you manage stock on a per project basis, then by default, a project will be selected in the filter options. And so you'll only see stock for that project. And that is defined by the purchase order the items were bought on. So the items shown here were bought on purchase orders that were attached to the project BE002. And if we switch to project 1, we can see a different set of items which were bought for that project. Again, if your company manages stock across all projects, then you would select from here any would be selected by default, and you would see stock across all projects and the totals across the whole company. In previous versions of IMPS, we would show badges against stock lines that described how many items were allocated. In this new setup, we now show badges showing how many items are free. As a reminder, free stock is how much stock we'll have remaining after we have fulfilled all open work orders. If we look at the BE01 engine, for example, we have 20 in stock at the moment, but we only have 15 free. So this implies that we're going to need to consume 5 on open work orders. And again, if we use the production info tab and switch to project 2, because that's what this one belongs to, or any project, we can look at the use of this part. And we can see that one of the items in stock is directly allocated to this work order number 6. We then have 19 items in stock that are available, so they haven't been directly allocated yet, but we have an upcoming demand for 5 of them, which means that our net quantity available is 15. And that is the same number as we see here. We have 15 free items. And again, from stock, we can still use the same commands of ticking the box and choosing book out to book out stock onto work orders or activities. So the final step to show is work orders, and some changes have been made to make it easier to book out items from stock. So we can select the work order search tab, which will give us a list of open bill demands and work orders. And we can sort this list by the number of missing parts. So we can find work orders that have no missing parts, so they're all in stock. And so these are ones that can now be picked and assembled. So here we have one for the engine frame assembly. And if we open up that activity, we can see that it requires 2 parts, engine, which we have 19 available, and of which we need 4, and the mounting frame, of which there are 2 available and we need 1. We can see here, because we are on the work order view, that we also get shown the stock location for these. So we can see that these are in AA1 and BB8, and we can book them out just by using the book out button on the right here. And then once they're booked out, we can see if we return to stores and look at project 2, that the quantity has now been reduced. We've now got 1 frame in stock and 16 of the engines. And we still have the same number of free stock parts because all we've done is we've booked out parts to an existing work order that we already have been planning for in advance. So that concludes this tutorial on the new automatic part allocation strategy. And just to recap, what we've seen is that for parts, we can select this new strategy called automatic allocation. And in future, you may find that new parts you create on existing parts have already been switched to that allocation strategy by default. And what this means is that we don't have to allocate items as soon as we purchase them. We can purchase them separately and then put them in stock. And only when we come to actually book them out to a specific work order do they become directly allocated. And this gives us extra freedom to mix and match, so we can buy things that were maybe originally intended for one work order, but actually, due to rejigging of production, end up being used elsewhere. We still have the old features of doing direct allocations. So if we have a specific serial number or a specific part with a certain history that needs to go into a certain assembly, we can still make those direct allocations and make sure that's what happens. This has led to some changes on the item search page, where we now have this new list, and we also have some new, more generic information giving us totals of how many we've got on order, how many we have in stock, and how many we require. And a lot of good information to guide us through our purchasing and production is available in the production information dialog. And we can look at that for a specific project or across all projects in the company. I hope you found this tutorial interesting, and we look forward to bringing you more videos in the future going through other new features in IMPS and some deep dives into existing features and how best they can be used.